We have to join together to ensure that drug dealers are punished swiftly, surely, and severely. And in line with what the president is calling for, we have to hold every drug user accountable.
That's Joe Biden when he was a senator, and he actually was to the right of Ronald Reagan when it came to the drug war. In fact, he pushed Reagan as much as he possibly could to implement the drug war. This is something that most people are actually not so aware of because the criticism toward Biden is usually aimed at the crime bill. But when it comes to the war on drugs, if you look at the details and you look at what he was pushing for, he was certainly going for right-wing policy that had severe ramifications throughout the country. Now, oftentimes Biden says, look, the crime bill, that was federal legislation. The majority of the prison population is on the state level or the municipal level. So don't criticize me for that. I mean, just take a look at what these states are doing. But in reality, Biden fought aggressively to take federal funding and distribute it to the states so they could basically implement tough on crime policies that he was in favor of. So according to a great piece in The Intercept, it was written by David Stein. You should read the whole piece. David Stein writes, it was Biden who was among the principal and earliest movers of the policy agenda that would become the war on drugs and mass incarceration. And he did so in the face of initial reluctance from none other than President Ronald Reagan. Reagan even vetoed a signature piece of Biden legislation, which he drafted with Senator Strom-Thurmond of South Carolina to create a federal drug czar.
So let's pause there for a couple of minutes here. If you notice in the first clip we played, Biden didn't talk about going after just drug dealers. He talked about going after drug users. And he said we have to get tough on them. When you read the whole history of Joe Biden's zealotry on the war on drugs, it's a little revolting. And I have to confess that I forgot some of it, and some of it I didn't know. Now, I know he worked with Strom-Thurmond. Strom-Thurmond ran on a segregationist ticket as the presidential candidate for that. So that people say that was a long time ago that Strom-Thurmond did that, then he then became a Republican again. No, I remember Strom-Thurmond, and he was deeply racist. He was always racist, he never changed his mind. And so the fact that he was no longer a segregationist party person and now a Republican Party person doesn't matter at all. So when Reagan was too liberal for Joe Biden, he reached out to Strom-Thurmond.
Yes.
And he said, hey, listen, you pull your right wing, I'll make sure I keep the liberals away, okay? And he said, let's try to convince Reagan to appoint a drug czar. And Reagan partly, and if you don't give Reagan too much credit, part of the reason he didn't want to do it is because rhetorically he was already doing the war on drug stuff. He just didn't want to back it up with money because he wanted to give most of the money to the rich, so he didn't want to spend money on prisons, etc. Now, at the end of the day, I'm glad he didn't spend money on prisons. I'm glad he didn't do a drug czar but of course wound up doing it at the very end. But Biden was to the right of him, no question. In fact, here, there's a lot of quotes, but I want to read you one here that really struck me. At the time, Biden said, as most old line Democrats view it, the only ways we can deal with violence will have a negative impact on civil rights and liberties. I think that's malarkey. So he's saying, I don't care about civil rights. I think that's malarkey. We're just gonna do these crime bills. We're gonna put everybody in prison, and I don't care about civil rights and liberties.
He was the initial critic of social justice warriors.
Yeah, in a sense, that's right. And remember, they asked him about some of these comments in the last debate. They didn't even get to these more damaging comments. And when asked, hey, you said you didn't give a damn what happened 300 years ago, meaning slavery. He said, yeah, but you got to play a record player to your kids. And he didn't answer the question, and he went on a rambling, and he said, oh, social workers have to come and teach you how to deal with your kids. That is not a good answer. So I'm almost depressed to see Biden's true record. I'm obviously not in his camp in this race, but I like a lot of people in America thought like, oh, Uncle Joe, and he does gaffes, but he's a likable guy. You look at his real record on crime and drugs and civil liberties.
What he really believes,
right? And civil rights. And that is not a likable Uncle Joe.
So I want to show you a little more of unlikable Uncle Joe in this next clip. Take a look.
It's not just how many people are using drugs. As the president said, the number of people using drugs, cocaine in particular, is down in our country. That's true. But the violence associated with drugs is spewing out all over America, and that's terrible. I know it's hard to believe, but this very day, violent drug offenders will commit more than 100,000 crimes on this day alone. And the sad part is that we have no more police in the streets of our major cities than we had 10 years ago. And what the president proposes won't help much. What he proposes is no increase over what the Congress has already approved last year. In a nutshell, the president's plan doesn't include enough police officers to catch the violent thugs, not enough prosecutors to convict them, not enough judges to sentence them, and not enough prison cells to put them away for a long time.
Now that video is from 1989, but I want to rewind really quickly to give you a sense of the type of rhetoric coming from Biden in 1981. So let's go to graphic 7. This is a direct quote from Joe Biden. He said in 1981, "My patience for action in the drug arena by this administration is beginning to waver. Just as I criticize the Carter administration for a lack of innovative ideas in this area, I will criticize this administration if promises and rhetoric are not soon replaced by results." Now, in the same year, Biden and Thurmond proposed a bill. And the bill increased penalties for drugs, including expanding civil asset forfeiture.
So that's where that cancer began.
Exactly. Created a sentencing commission and eradicated parole at the federal level. It sought to limit access to bail, a provision denounced by the ACLU for, quote, reversing the presumption of innocence. And by the way, Reagan vetoed the Biden-Thurmond bill.
So the House Democrats had already stripped away the bail and parole parts of it because they were so vicious and anti-democratic. And even so, the lighter version of the bill, Reagan thought was a bridge too far. Man, Biden's record on this is horrible. So go back to 1989 where he was talking about those violent thugs. Now look, people give it historical context and crime was at a much higher rate back then than it is today, and a lot of people were concerned. But people knew what he was talking about when he said thugs. And that's why, and by the way, another part of the bills that he authored was the 100-to-1 crack to cocaine disparity. That was also Biden. And so what white people doing cocaine on Wall Street, well, it's not that big a problem. Thugs doing crack cocaine in inner cities, huge problem. You gotta put them away for life, right? And so back in '89, he said about George Bush, the first George Bush, that he wasn't, quote, not tough enough on the war on drugs. And he went on to say, the president says he wants to wage a war on drugs, but if that's true, what we need is another D-Day, not another Vietnam, not a limited war fought on the cheap. So Biden is the granddaddy of the war on drugs. There's no question about it, and imprisoned millions of Americans. And so you can say, hey, maybe that was right for the time. I don't agree with that. And by the way, a guy who through all that time fought against it was Bernie Sanders. And we've shown you some of those speeches that he gave on the floor of the House, where he was just lit into these crime bills, saying it does crush civil rights, it does crush civil liberties, and I do care about that, right? So now Biden did a trick of putting the Violence Against Women Act into the '94 bill, which eventually passed because it got even progressives like Bernie Sanders to go, well, we gotta pass the Violence Against Women Act. So that was his last trick to finally get these bills passed. And also they were not as bad as the '91 bills and the 1980s bills. But he fought on these grounds from the beginning of time and started the war on drugs. And if you say, well, that was then, yeah, but why are we picking a guy who was so wrong on all of these issues? He's wrong on the Iraq war, he was wrong on the war on drugs, wrong on crime. How many more things does he have to be wrong on before we don't pick him as our candidate in the year 2019?
And he continues to be wrong on these policies, and in some instances even defends the decisions he made and the things that he pushed for back in the day.
2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.